Just before we get underway today, I'm just going to take a moment to tell people a little bit about the Alcuin Society. I noticed that there were some new names that had signed up. The Alcuin Society was founded in 1965, and it's the only nonprofit organization in Canada that is dedicated to the entire range of interests in the books and reading. Now, through a variety of different means, we extend interest in and focus around book history, and that's done through through the Society's journal Amphora, which is published 3 times a year, and it covers a whole variety of topics from publishing to book design and production, the history of the book, type design, printing, binding, really you name it. Any issue, if you pick it up, it has a whole variety of different topics it touches on. To further our aims as well, we also engage in a wide variety of educational activities, such as the talk that we're providing this evening. And that also happens in person as well through various educational institutions, such as Emily Carr, the UBC, as well as SFU and UVic. Now, another element of the Alcuin Society is the annual book awards, and it's the only national competition of its kind in the country that recognizes and celebrates the art of the book and design in Canada. Winners of this award represent the nation in international exhibitions and competitions at Frankfurt and Leipzig book fairs. If you are not a member of the Alcuin Society or your membership has lapsed, I will be putting the link in the chat this evening, and you can have a look and re-up your subscription or consider becoming a member. And if you have any questions for Gary as the talk is going on this evening, please put them in the chat, and we will have a Q&A afterwards, and we'll make sure that we get to any questions people have at that point. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to
whatever his name is.
Over to you, Richard.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to introduce Gary Sim. But you'll be relieved to know that I'm not going to attempt to summarize Gary Sim's entire 32-page resume, which I located on his personal website. But if you go there, it makes for interesting reading. So I will just first note that Gary Sim has indeed been a very good friend to the Alcuin Society. He's been an active member for some 18 years now. He has donated many pieces of his artwork to the Society, which we have been able to auction off in our fundraisers. Not to mention that he has always been one of the big spenders at our annual book auction. That's really the reason we cherish his membership. Personally, he was of great help to me when I was editor of Amphora. Gary could always be relied upon to write excellent articles for me. And several times he contributed his own artwork to the publication, which contributed greatly to the visual appeal of the journal. Just noting 2 of his employment activities, and if you got to go to his website, because the guy must have had 70 or 80 different jobs in his life. I found it interesting that he was at one time a driller, scaler, blaster rock gang foreman for the BC Rail High Scaling Group, chronicled in a book he wrote and published in 2013 entitled Railway Rock Gang.
Well done. That's the one.
Probably copies are still available for purchase. He probably has a closet full of them.
I actually sold 6 this week.
Oh, good. God damn. But in the years that I've known him, his work has been primarily as an architectural draftsman and technologist, and he did some very interesting projects there. But there's much more to Gary than his employment record. First, he is a writer. I have mentioned his articles for Amphora and his railway book, but at present he's working on a biography of a significant BC artist, Maud Sherman. So I'll be looking forward to that one when it finally comes out. Yes, Gary.
After many years, yeah.
Yeah, he is an artist, an excellent printmaker in his own right. He has participated in numerous art exhibitions, and his work hangs in a number of Canadian art galleries and in many private collections. He has received many honors, awards, and nominations for his accomplished artwork.
Not enough, yeah.
His dedication to art is further emphasized by his numerous donations of art publications and artwork to libraries, archives, museums, and art galleries across Canada. I will just say that the monetary value of these benefactions is considerable. I promised I wasn't going to give a dollar figure, but he's been very generous.
It's penal of me, yes.
I have left the fact that Gary is the owner and publisher of Sim Publishing to the last, since Gary will be speaking tonight about his most significant contribution to Canadian publishing and to Canadian cultural life, British Columbia Artists, a bibliographic finding aid to information on more than 20,000 artists who worked or are working in British Columbia from the 1700s to the present day. Now, personally, if I had taken on such a demanding project, I would have limited myself strictly to the artists of Prince Edward Island. Gary.
There's probably more than you know of. Right?
Oh, heck. That's it.
That's it. Thank you, Richard. Is someone in charge here?
It's over to you now.
Where's me? Share screen?
Yeah.
No, out of print, this one. There. Lock, and then where are we here? This one. Full screen? Is this the one? No, slideshow, sorry. Eek. Not that menu. Ah. Computer's faster than I am. Slideshow from beginning. Okay, here we are. Is everything looking good out there?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. So thank you the introduction, Richard. Thank you for Spencer for the arrangements. And thank you to the Alcuin Society for hosting this lecture series. And of course, a special thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I put together a presentation that looks at some of the material I've collected or referenced during my quarter century of research into the early visual artists of British Columbia. I've also posted this slideshow and a summary of the information and artists in the slides with links to my BC artists on my webpage per the link here. That's also going to be available at the end of the slideshow. This all started when I got this watercolor by Maud Sherman at auction, untitled, undated, and the auctioneer said she'd been a student of Fred Varley's, and that sort of piqued my interest. I started looking and eventually found a drawing, pen and ink drawing, published by Maud in 1922 in School Days magazine, but I still didn't know where it was. And eventually I found out where it was and stood there, took pictures of it, did my own artwork of the same location, and found out quite a bit about Maud Sherman, who'd painted this, the watercolor that got me started. These two pictures are courtesy of the Savory Island Heritage Society. Here on the left, she's helping her father hunt for bugs in Stanley Park while carrying all of her watercolor and sketching materials. The Savory Island Heritage Society, by way of the president, Conde Landale, got in touch with me 20 years ago about my research into Maud Sherman, and we became good friends. And he was extremely helpful with his research, and he was an excellent historian. And unfortunately, he passed away a few weeks ago. So this is kind of in his honor, if you will. So in the research, what was I actually looking for outside of actual artwork? These would be some of the main categories: exhibition catalogs, periodicals and journals, art school publications, books, commercial artwork, correspondence, artist cards, postcards, public art, clippings, picture framing labels, which I like, historical photographs, vital statistics. Vital statistics are a bit droll, but for some of these categories, like catalogues, the BC Society of Fine Arts had some excellent illustrated catalogs through the years, with most of the major artists in British Columbia being represented on the cover at one time or another. And I name all of these artists in a summary of the material that I've got here. So you don't have to, I was going to sort of try to name every artist and explain what each one was, but they've only given me 40 minutes to talk, so I have to keep going. And of course, who would not want an original lino cut by George Cuthan, printed in 1956 for the annual catalog. Also periodicals, going from Westward Ho, Man to Man, artists' illustrations. Butterfat produced a photo by John Vanderpant in 1934 about town, an opening at the art gallery with a recently restored painting on the back wall they'd found in the dungeons from 20 years prior. The art school, of course, was significant in its amount of material produced. The image in the middle is by Jock MacDonald, a lino cut, and he also designed the little red kind of figure in the right-hand side, Vancouver School of Art. And he also designed this sort of bird figure, which continued through the years. And of course, being an art school, the prospecti and the annuals had to be artistic. And the bird continues. Night school courses and ephemera became collectible. Behind the Palette, 1939 and 40 was just absolutely incredible production. And here's a picture on the right-hand side of the art school itself. This was facing Pender Street, looking down onto Victory Square at the time. The savory pudding came my way a few years ago, a couple years ago. It was done by the art school students, 1935 and 1939, up on Savory Island, doing sketches and jokes and limericks and poems and the news items of the day. Quite an incredible amount of information with all kinds of artists contributing to it. And it's a little bit poignant too, because at the end of the session, it's June 7th, 1939. And 2 months later, less than, Germany invaded Poland. Summer was over. Of course, artists also did commercial artwork. The top three are from the Vancouver School Board. The bottom left is by BC Binning for a bank on Granville Street, and a couple of commercial products as well. And then artists also did their own greeting cards, so watercolors, pen and ink, lithographs, etchings, prints, all kinds of things. And these are just some of the ones that have come my way or gone the other way. And public art is all over the place, but when you sort of, some of it's hard to find, but when you see it, it's nice to know who actually did it and when it was done. So here's some of the ones from around Vancouver. Newspaper clippings, came across hundreds of those during the years, and here's just a few samplings of them. Many of them are transcribed in BC artists. And I particularly like picture framing labels. The one in the dead center is the West Vancouver Archives. It's been nibbled by silverfish, as has the one below it. The one in the center was the David Spencer's Jubilee exhibition in 1936, and that was, it turned out to be a huge exhibition with like hundreds of artworks and a major presentation, event that I'd never even heard about. And it was still hard to find. I eventually found some information from a time capsule that had been buried in 1936 and had a newspaper clipping about the show, but mostly talked about the people who attended the opening and what they were wearing. But it did name a few pictures and some prizes. I'm going to name a couple of two artists who were important in the early growth of arts in BC after 1900. Bernard McAvoy was from Britain. He wrote this. He was sent by his newspaper in Toronto on a cross-Canada trip to send letters back and say what it was like out here. So he visited the West Coast and everywhere in between, and sent some nice photos. They don't say who the photographer is. Here's one showing the Empress of India in Coal Harbor. And he had an interesting story about visiting a Steveston salmon cannery, where the workers took a break every hour to smoke a pipe of opium. He moved to Vancouver and was one of the 5 founding members of the BC Society of Fine Arts in 1908, exhibited a lot of artwork in their exhibitions, helped found the BC Art League in 1920, and they promoted the opening of a Vancouver art school and an art gallery in which they succeeded in 1925 and 1931. Second major person who came in 1905, this is a picture of him from 1913-14, was John Kyle. He arrived here in 1905 to be the art supervisor for Vancouver City Schools, and along with Bernard McAvoy, helped found the BC Society of Fine Arts. And he also helped start the Island Arts and Crafts Society in Victoria in 1908, 1909. And he also jumped into the local art scene. He illustrated a book, Poetry, by Annie Dalton in 1906. There's a picture of Annie Dalton from the Vancouver Archives, I believe, on the left on the cover page, the front cover of the book. A few little sort of simple illustrations by Kyle in the book. Then he also illustrated a number of other publications locally, including these images. On the right-hand side, you can see the next issue of Amphora being printed. And then he also published 3 books on design for industrial arts with a number of illustrations as well. He was promoted to art master at the Provincial Normal School, and in 1913, director of technical education for the entire province. And in 1925, notably, he wrote a $50,000 check that opened the Vancouver School of Art. And this book came my way one day. In 2015, I got a voice message at work. A man I didn't know said, "I have something I think you want. Call me." I did. And Lars Lehman, a Calgary realtor, claimed to have the diary of Marjorie Sherman. I actually didn't believe him, as I'd been told that all of the family papers had been lost in a fire. He emailed me a photograph of the title page, and I changed my mind. Lars had been visiting Vancouver and found the diary outside Banyan Books on 4th Avenue, where there's a small trolley beside the door with a box on it. The sign says books will be either left there or taken away. He took it, found my online biography of Maud Sherman, found me, and mailed it to me, free. It starts with 2 pages of Maud's mother describing the first few years of her life, including the day she was born, which was certainly not something I was expecting to come across when I started researching her. The diary has 10 original photographs taken by her father, presumably except the one in which she's in, tipped in, including her mother, her father, and Maud over the years. Her father, Reuter Stinson Sherman, was not your average gentleman. He had incredible abilities. And these are sort of some of the affiliations of the groups that he was related to, organized with, was the president of chairman and trustee, charter member. And he was also an author and a naturalist, photographer. He always had pets in the house, and so on. But he also headed a library, and Maud Sherman in her diaries filled 5 pages of her diary with a list of books in the library. This slide shows about 1/3 of the books that she listed. There are about 150 altogether. And despite being over 110 years old, many of the authors and books are still well known. I mean, Swiss Family Robinson, and who doesn't know Jack London or Rudyard Kipling or Mark Twain, etc. It's just an amazing collection of books. And here's a photo of R.S. Sherman himself in his living room with a little bit of shelf glimpse in the back. And I've been able to make out the gold stripe #2 and the book on Chester, the Roman city in England, but not actually make out any other titles. The gold stripe #2, I've had a copy of that myself, but I don't think it was his. I have assembled my own small collection of the Sherman Library. All of these are ex libris from the Sherman family, either Maud or her father, and they provide some interesting glimpses into the past. So they're all dating from 1902 to 1931, so they're up to 120 years old. So it's interesting that I have them from their family collection. Far Away and Long Ago. This is a second edition of J.M. Dent published. This is the illustrated one with some really nice wood engravings by Eric Fitch Dalgleish, an English artist. He also, let me see, illustrated books for, oops, next slide. Hudson himself was a prolific author whose best-known book is Green Mansions. Ernest Hemingway put Far Away and Long Ago on his list of recommended reading for young writers, and this book was made into a movie in 1978. The book was given to R.S. Sherman by his publisher in 1931, and on the left we have the only RSS bookplate I have seen, most likely drawn by his daughter, Maud. The engravings, the wood engravings are absolutely superb. These are photographs of them, not scans, and these don't do justice to the images. This artist also illustrated works by Isaac Walton and Henry David Thoreau, and wrote numerous natural history, wildlife, and countryside books. Another book on the shelf was Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling. The cover was embossed with an elephant and a swastika, and Rudyard Kipling had a monograph of the swastika. They're interestingly rotating different directions, so I'm not sure if it's an oversight by the die sinker who made the stamp and the swastika should go the other way. They have gone both ways over history. This was given to Maud by her father, 1910, and a Galloway bookstore stamp. I like finding these little stamps in the books. And in the book, we have some images of Millar, Harold Robert Millar. He also illustrated books by H. Rider Haggard and Robert Louis Stevenson. The English edition of this book featured 4 full-color plates by Arthur Rackham. 1910, Little Women came out. This was sort of the golden age of illustrated books. The book itself doesn't have a date, but the color illustrations are by Norman Little and signed 1910. Maudry Sherman bookplate, Forsyth bookseller stamp, illustrations by Norman Little, who was killed in World War I in action and terminated his artistic career. Charles G.D. Roberts was a well-known Canadian writer and poet, and some people think he was the first well-known Canadian author and poet outside of the country. He was prolific and he wrote a lot of books. There's a picture of him from the City of Vancouver Archives dedicated to Ernest Fuster, the president of the Vancouver Poetry Society. I think Chester Grisky is working on some information about those people. He had an apparent fondness for moose. Here's a Kindred of the Wild with its book stamp, his first book of animal stories, and illustrations from the book by Charles Livingston Bull, another moose, and some wabbits. The Watchers of the Trails, another moose and a wabbit, and the lynx up in the tree. I like the moose, and this one's signed by Maud's father, Reuter S. Sherman. The Heart of the Ancient, the Watchers of the Trail. Here's a sort of a glimpse of the kind of image, again, another sort of grayscale drawing by Livingston Bull. Heart of the Ancient Woods, this is almost modern looking, but it's not. 115 years old, 16 years old, and a Thompson stationery stamp. So let me catch my breath here. The Northern Cadillaran. I found a copy of this and then I traded up to a better copy with Glenn Woodsworth of the Alcuin Society. This one is Reuter Stinson Sherman's own personal copy. And I like it also because it has the logo that was designed by his brother, Arthur Evans Sherman, in 1907. And despite the passage of time, it's been modified ever so slightly over the years. As far as I know, it's still their club emblem 115 years later. R.S. Sherman also had an article in the book, The Mountaineers and Entomologist. He's listed as a DLS, Dominion Land Surveyor. He was also an Ontario and BC land surveyor. And he notes about insects that one will keep you up busy all day and perhaps another will keep you busy all night. He was also a director and chairman and trustee of the Savory Island Park Association. So here's some of their marketing material from quite some time ago. I'm not quite sure, about 1915, I think. Again, courtesy of the Savory Island Heritage Society. And again, the same point, Mace Point on the South Shore, facing Vancouver Island, no, that's the mainland in the distance, and it faces due south. Condé Landville recently sent me this photograph of the Sherman family cottage on Savory Island from, I don't know, about 1920 or so. We had an interesting discussion about the pole in the middle of the roof, like what would they put up it? Was it a lightning rod, a radio antenna, or whatever? But I found a little sketch by Maud that shows it's a flagpole. So that was interesting from her diary, a flagpole. This is a picture that I took of the cottage in 2003 on Savory Island, which has since been demolished and another building rebuilt, somewhat in its style. So that's a little sort of run of Sherman things. 1913-14 Provincial Normal School was where teachers were taught to teach, and students, they went next door to the model school to have a class of students to practice on. But there was art masters were first John Kyle, and then W.P. Weston took over after John Kyle, and Weston stayed there for 20-25 years as the art master. Was sort of the sponsor of the Sketch Club, which published regular cartoons in the various normal school annuals. And Weston himself did occasional illustrations in the annual, or on his own. He did a series while he was laid up in bed one winter, apparently. And the green one on the upper right was done by Carscraft as a donation to them for their fundraisers. The Gold Stripe was an interesting early publication in Vancouver after World War I, with lots, it was just full of artwork by local artists. And this is a photograph by Charles Marega of a sculpture called The Wounded Soldier. Here's a typical sort of pen and ink drawing, an article on Marega, again, with him lower left looking at the sculpture of the wounded soldier. Josiah Howard Smith, Be Brighter When the Boys Come Back after the war, a long time ago. The Gold Stripe #2, another Charles Marega on the front. And they had a #3, which I never had. School Days magazines came out from the Vancouver School Board in 1919. And it's a very obscure little publication, which actually has a lot of artists in it. This is the inaugural image with an illustration by Spencer Percival Judge. 1924, cover by Hal Woods, another one by Patricia Morrison, 2 full-page illustrations for Holidays by Charles Hepburn Scott, another illustration by Spencer Percival Judge for a story about a strange pet, Maud Sherman illustration. And I love the lower one, Dinosaurs on Kitts Point. There's False Creek, there's the Sylvia, there's the Anglesey Apartments. And upper right, we have what, a plesiosaur with the English Bay Pier and the dance pavilion in the distance. That'll keep the tourists away or bring them in like flies. This is the earliest published illustration by E.J. Hughes that I found. I think he was 12 years old at the time. Was it 12? Is that what I said? 12 years old? Something like that. And whoops, where we go? R.S. Sherman did a number of illustrations for his own articles and for articles by others. And John Innes, who's a noted historic artist in BC, also did the Romance of BC advertisements for Shelley's, which are also published elsewhere. And in case you don't know how long 100 years ago is, electricity is a new method to bake bread, which ensures an evenly cooked loaf. You don't have to start a fire to get dinner going either. So where are we here? Indian Legends. Indian Legends of Vancouver Island. I wasn't going to include this one. It's illustrated by William Jacobus Semaine. He was born in Holland in 1890 and came to BC, Canada in 1907. He did some very nice pen and ink illustrations in this book. Very nice detail and very nice sense of perspective and distance in his pen and ink work, which is not easy to achieve, I don't think. But last week, I got an envelope in the mail from somebody I don't know in Amsterdam who sent me 3 postcards that Jacobus Semaine had sent to his family from Canada 115 years ago. So here we are in Winnipeg, writing back to his family in Old Dutch, other than Pacific Rail, Montreal, naar Winnipeg. You can sort of make out some of it, but I don't know. The Chung collection at UBC has almost an identical scene of this number 825 chugging down the road, but it's broad daylight and a bright sunny day. So this is a painted postcard, or the original of this was painted before it was printed. And coming through the Rockies, lands in Vancouver. He's living on Cordova Street. And then he makes it out to the West Coast, where he's in Victoria. And I believe he did work on the construction or the artwork in the provincial legislature buildings in Victoria. He also registered with the Architectural Institute of British Columbia as the 107th registered person with them. And in the year 2000, I registered as member number 5,679. Mother Nature Stories. This was R.S. Sherman's first published book, as far as I know. I used to have his own personal copy, but now I just have a beat up one that I recently reacquired from England. Quill Pig being, of course, a porcupine. Maud illustrated a number of the stories and articles in it among the pines along Anderson Lake, which I knew very well from the railway. Her father, again, illustrated numerous stories with, he's probably better at bugs than he is at squirrels. And ants. There's a few unsigned or untitled illustrations, could be anybody, but there's a few that were, I was like, what? A.R. and A. Rackham, 99, Arthur Rackham. So a few illustrations by Arthur Rackham, the famous English illustrator. Apparently the publisher had acquired rights to some of his artwork, and they were put into this book. It must have made Maud and her father quite happy to see those there. A few years later, maybe not Sherman's second book, because he did some silent study readers and some nature and language workbooks along the way. The Canadian Industrial Reader was a major book. I wasn't going to include this because there's not much artwork, other than the fact that I own the original cover artwork for it. This is about 1.5 times the size of the actual published material. You can see at the bottom it says 5 1/8 bare, which I think they mean 5 1/8 inches. When you print this, it's going to be 5 1/8 inches wide. It's actually 5 inches exactly. And they did a little bit of, as you can see, a little gold embossing. The sun is gold, but it's hard to tell here. And here's a detail of the sort of text, which has been painted in white ink on black, which would be tricky. Captivating Vancouver. Came out in 1924, published by the Vancouver Sun publishing company. And I like it because it has a lot of original artworks, pen and ink drawings of Vancouver as it used to be. So on the right-hand side, we have the old Vancouver Hotel lurking on the skyline, the Jericho Country Club, which the city wants to turn into a row of towers, ultra-modern hotels, which is again the demolished in 1949 Vancouver Hotel. And they have a menu. Listen to the menu of the hotel. It sounds actually fabulous. Out of Way Backwaters. 1925, the Vancouver City Schools Trustees Annual Report reprinted the Charles Hepburn Scott drawing from 1915 before Charles went off to war and got wounded and came back. But it had a report on the first. The art school opened in 1925. So it had a report on the art school. So they had a nice photograph of the art school teacher and staff. They had photographs of the classes themselves. Here's Charles Maraga's modeling class. The arrow is pointing to my girl, Maud Sherman. Behind her with the braided hair is Laurentia Herkmer, the daughter of Colonel Herkmer. And at the end of the year, the students produced an annual titled The Paint Box. And inside it, I found an article, a feature article, if you will, by Maud Sherman, Places to Sketch. And it carried on the next page, but at some point, Mrs. Joan Dendy's gave me a large collection of Maud Sherman's artwork, including watercolors that could only be from the places to sketch sort of article. She mentions every one of them, and it's like, okay, Port Alberni, yep, here we go, yep. Esquimalt, yep. Paint Box also reproduced one of her artworks from the first year, 1925-26. Joan Dennis later gave me the actual artwork that had been used for that image, and it was poster size, 18 by 24. I thought they were much smaller. And it's interesting, just below the trillium, it has equilateral triangle when used in design as a sort of a note in pencil. Tom McInnes is an interesting person, and Chinook Days is a tiny little publication, again, with a bookseller stamp. 1926, issued in a limited edition of 1,000. My copy is number 605. Heavily illustrated by artists, but Tom McInnes was an interesting person. He was a writer and a poet involved in politics, and was concerned with limiting Asian immigration, and published a book on the matter. Other books were poetry and sort of ramblings, and this one is sort of memories. And one article here discusses the history of Vikings in British Columbia, and I didn't know there was one actually. A nice drawing by John Innes of Cole Harbor, basically looking at the lions, which I don't think is quite correct. A couple by Josiah Howard Smith, the old pack trail up Grouse Mountain and Devil's Leap. I don't know where that is, but probably closed to the public. Mike King, Star Timber Cruiser. Captain Alexander McLean was the role model for the Sea Wolf on Jack London's novel of the same title. And here's apparently some pictures that McInnes had of these cowboys of the Old West. David Spencer's department store was an early promoter of the arts in Vancouver, and they had, this was their stamp, one of the little stickers. The Diamond S was actually the logo and probably the brand for their ranch up in the interior. And they published on a regular basis store topics. So with all kinds of things, midsummer sports, and just doings and comings, and talking, the shipping department gets to tell their story, and they talk about, the ladies' wear and this, that, and the other thing, and events and doings. And illustrated by artists, including this etching by Edward Joseph Cherry, and other artworks, both by their staff and commissioned. The one on the right here by Buckley Studios. Lower left is the arcade, which I think is now SFU Harborside. If you go in the main door, this is sort of the space that existed back then. By Shore and Trail in Stanley Park. Yeah, pause for rehydration. This is a nice little book, and these books can be found incredibly inexpensive in bookstores if you just sort of go rummaging around. He had a full-time job, professional, but he liked to write stories, and he liked to have stories illustrated. So here's some drawings that were in his book, and a photograph on the right of the Shelley Stone, which was something that was dragged down from the Caribou about 100 years ago and plopped into Stanley Park. And after a bit of moving around, it was repatriated back to where it came from 10 years ago, which was somewhere north of Boston Bar. And it's like, oh, here's your 6-ton rock back. Thank you for the loan. This book also had a reproduction of a nice John Innes painting. He was good at historical paintings. And a few years later, Harry White did a pen and ink drawing of the painting by John Innes of the same event in another book, Vignettes of Vancouver by what's his name? Hood. The Art, Historical, and Scientific Association of Vancouver was actually founded in 1894, but they didn't get around to publishing museum notes until 1926. And this is volume 1, number 1, illustrated by Francis Noel Bursell. I acquired at one point a bound volume of the first 3 years of it, done by Fugler and McKinnon. Map mounters, paper rulers, etc. It almost sounds like an insult. A 1931 copy of Museum and Art Notes, renamed by that time from only Museum Notes, with an article by R.S. Sherman, The Ecology of Savory Island, and a drawing, pen and ink drawing by Maud Sherman. Charles Hepburn Scott published his own little ditty in 1932, and this is a preliminary announcement for it. It was only going to be $2.50 for a folio containing 8 illustrations similar to this, and bounds in such a manner that you could remove them for easy framing, and that meant they were tied together with string. The Vancouver Technical School had a printing class, and every year the students of the class designed and laid out and printed their own annual. So here's a little flyer tipped in. What could be nicer than to get a copy of the Van Tech, and the front cover image of a 1933 issue with, oh, another copy of the Amphora being printed. I forget which one that was. And they always included a whole bunch of original color lino cut prints. The one top right by Sing Lim, who Richard was supposed to get me a book of, but is in the mail. And George Obokata in the bottom of the cartoon. Ha-cha, did you hear the news? Mr. Sinclair calls us technocrats. 1939, Robert Banks did this lovely 5-color lino cut for the front cover image, like literally 3 or 4 months after the bridge opened, which is quite amazing. And he was also an excellent cartoonist. This is a really funny one, and especially the one with the bikes in the car down in the lower right-hand corner, where the car driver is identified by initials as Mr. Sinclair, the school principal. Everyone else is identified by sort of little EBB or names or numbers or whatever. It's pretty funny. And he went off to war, World War II, worked as an illustrator and painter when he came back after going to art school. Sing Lim was a graduate of the art school, and he provided 2 4-color lino cut prints, or a number of lino cuts. This is one of them. Tech graduates. There's like 11 people pictured here in 4-color lino cut. The original's 2 inches high, 5 inches wide. That would have been a printing challenge. And the same with sport. 5 people, 4-color, 2 inches high, 5 inches wide. Nice work with the lino cutting, I tell you. Vancouver Technical 1946 25th anniversary issue, slightly different cover, typical sort of lino cuts. Staff photo shows Jock MacDonald, JWG MacDonald of the Canadian Group of Painters, in his last session here at the school. After this, he went to Calgary, I believe, to teach there. And it's interesting to see him standing in front of 3 Sampson Matthews silkscreen prints by Canadian artists, because Jock's probably the only one in the room who knows who did them, probably knew them all personally. They also had an honor roll of students who'd gone off to World War II. 1,409, either students or graduates, of whom were 11% were killed or missing, etc. 34 decorated. The honor roll was accompanied by 8 illustrations, little illustrations, either like 2 inches by 3 inches or less. I think 1.5 inches by 2.5. And I think Jock MacDonald did them, like the soldier in the top row with the helmet. Like there's a burning building town behind him. He's just got this 1,000-yard stare. It's like, yep, next. Been there, done that kind of thing. BC College of Arts was founded 1933 by a couple of refugee teachers from the art school, Vancouver Art School. They got a cut in pay. They didn't like it, and they went on and started their own art school. So here's what the building looked like in 1996, just before demolition. This is what I call my Fred Herzog period. And the second year was an illustrated prospectus illustrated by Alec Dalgleish, who took the picture on the left. I took the picture on the right from inside the abandoned building. Alec Dalgleish also did some nice posters, like the one on the left. The image on the right is Harold Tauber, one of the 3 directors of the art school, who Jack Shedbolt described as having a glass eye and a beard and smoked a cigar and had a sort of an overcoat. And so this is like, yeah, I think that's Harold Tauber there. Fred Varley at landscape class, and Orville Fisher, Strive for Peace, 1934. Yeah, we're still looking for that, aren't we? Anyway, how are we doing for time here? 6:45 minus 8, 3 minutes or so. BC artist postcards. It took me a while to figure out who did these. The artists did. They got together and did them themselves. I have a collection of 10 of them. They're quite interesting. And the only other one I've ever seen was one that I found in the Vancouver Art Gallery library. And it was like, I pulled it out and it was like, oh, look, it's one of those Emily Carr postcards. And I put it down and I was like, wait a minute, it's written on the backside. Oh, it's from Emily Carr. Yeah, dear Mr. Grigsby. So she's asking about a show. And in his response, Mr. Grigsby, the curator of the gallery, thanks her for her note written on your own postcard, and gave her the show dates and gave her the watercolor room and the sculpture court. And unfortunately, she passed away 3 months later. And that was the show she never gave. Moving right along, 1958, Robert Reed, the BC Centennial Anthology. I only found out about this like a few months ago. I don't know why I missed it. I was able to nab a copy from the Paperhound bookstore, and Waters is best known for compiling the 2-volume checklist of Canadian literature, but he specifically excluded books written for children, so none of our Sherman books are listed in it. Here's a picture I took of our friend Robert Reed, who left us in January at a book launch, the Unheralded Artists of BC series book launch for Harry and Jessie Webb. This is at the Ferry Building Gallery, 2014. Here's a bit of the inside of the Centennial Bibliography with lots of artwork. They listed and used artwork for more than 50 BC artists, which was excellent. Robert also designed the BC Columbia Library Quarterly for a while. Here's a cover lino cut by Jeffrey Rees of the Vancouver School of Art. Oh, the last time I saw Robert, he kindly, at the Alcuin Ways Goose 2019, he kindly signed this for me, and a couple of other things, which was very nice. And he was like, he saw these big fonts. He's like, oh, those wooden fonts, I love those. Those were so much fun. And he was going on about how they didn't tell him what to do. They just said, here's the material, just do the printing. And he did. I loved it. It's beautiful. All these years later, he also did the this exhibition catalog for the BC Society of Artists. I only realized that recently. He did the 7 West Coast painters. Again, here's one of the huge woodblock fonts that he loved to use. 1963, Irene Whitome graduated from Vancouver School of Art. She was born here. She didn't have a middle name. She was Irene Whitome. She added Fraser, gave herself the middle name Fraser after the Fraser River. This is a limited edition book of drawings. It's letterpress printed, silkscreened combination, 101 copies, of which I have copy 61. Here's one of the interior images. Most of them are multicolor. Gerald Giampa was a well-known character to most of us. Here's some of his original ornaments that he cut. Here's another one with a lino caster type casting machine. This is about 3/8 of an inch square. It's microscopic. 1970, a bit of work by him. He was in North Vancouver at the time. 1978, some letterpress work. The cover for Gerald Giampa typographer, an exhibition at the Burnaby Art Gallery with approximately 864 ornaments laid out in 3 or 4 colors, I'm not quite sure. Cover Amphora, number 152, summer 2009, with more Giampa work. And I can't go on without mentioning Jim Rimmer's letterpress work, of course, although I've never actually owned one of his books, but his work is fabulous as well. And not to forget Dr. Joseph Wask with his book Reflections on Art and the Artist, which I've done much of, from the private press of Dr. Joseph Wask, Ariel Publishing Limited, and with a colophon designed by Robert Reed, printed letterpress by David Clifford, who I got to know quite well when I hired him to design my Railway Rock Gang book, and additional copies printed on paper handmade by Reg Lissel, who I also know and have printed my prints on. Still have some of his paper. And congratulations to Joseph Wask on his freedom of the city of the ward, which apparently includes a getaway free from the city parking meter system. Much of the information I've blathered about tonight is available on British Columbia Artists. Not all of it is, but much of it is, and much more information that I've mentioned tonight or could possibly mention. That's the web page there. One of the ways I've chosen to display information from 4,000 web pages and 1,500 images and 1,800 biographies is with an artist's birthday collage and the BC Artists monthly calendar. And I'm sure the artists would all like to thank you for your attention to my lecture tonight. Thank you. And here's a link to the Zoom information on my website that contains this. And thank you for joining us.
Gary, thank you very much. That was great.
Stop share?
Yeah, stop share. If anyone has any questions for Gary, please place them in the chat, and we can get to them. I have a couple questions that just come right off the top. The website. When did you set up the website as it is now, and when you started it, did you intend for it to be a way for people to get in touch with you, such as that real estate agent did with that kind of great old document?
Yeah, it's like deep sea fishing. You know, you put something up there and you have no idea what's going to come in on the hook.
Yeah.
No, I just started putting it together to sort of organize my research into Maud Sherman, because I was getting all these articles and quotes and bits of, you know, information and pictures and catalogs. And I was like, well, I gotta, you know, sort of organize it. So I started doing it just as and I wanted to do it in a way that would be forward looking,
right,
in terms of digital. I wanted to go digital, and I didn't want to write like a PDF. I didn't want to do like, there's like Macromedia Director. You remember that? No, you weren't born then, I don't think, you know.
I'm familiar with it though. I know about it. Yeah.
You know, there's like all kinds of programs and platforms that I could have written it with, but I just went plain simple HTML.
Yeah.
No, nothing, no hooks, no plugins, no nothing. And then just started pumping information into some categories: artists and exhibitions and groups and clippings and publications. And it sort of provided a place for everything to sort of just keep expanding. And then I was selling it on CD for quite a long time, but I got tired of sort of like, you know, shaming myself, trying to sort of, you need an upgrade, you know, it's only $50 this time, or, or, you know, buy it, it's a good deal, it's worth, you'll get your money out of it. And I was just like, oh, come on. I'm just like, so I just eventually, I was going to say pilloried, questioned a few of my clients, like Michael Kluckner and Josef Losk, who owned it, and Charlie Hill in Ottawa, who were always quite supportive. And I said, you mind if I just post it for free? Because they paid for copies. And they're like, no, that's a great idea. Yeah. And that's big boom. That saved me the effort of like mailing out updates and upgrades and marketing and, you know, slower and longer. Yeah.
You were mentioning a couple of instances where, mentioning the Sherman diary, but also looking at cards in the Emily Carr collections and things starting to connect. It seems like, listening to your talk, this world starts to kind of almost tilt in on you or gravitate towards you in a way. When did that start to happen? When did you start to realize that your engagement with your collection was starting to fill in these gaps, or maybe have you seeing very specific details?
Well, early on, when I was researching sort of general overall stuff, like I wanted to look up Maud Sherman in the index to British Columbia artists. Mm-hmm. Well, there isn't one. Mm-hmm. So it was like, well, the more I looked, the more there was no basic reference material. So I'm like, well, that's a pity. And the only thing I could really find and kept running across was Tom's early Vancouver artists, 1888 to 1930. Was quoted over and over and over, and it's like, well, no, there's like a zillion more artists than that. Mm-hmm. It would just seem that something needed to be put together to sort of account for it. And I sort of went from just being like somebody who wandered into an archive or the Vancouver Art Gallery library and said, "Hi, I'm looking for information on an artist." "Oh, hello, what artist are you looking for?" Here, and they give me some stuff to look through. And eventually I was asking questions that they'd sort of say, "Well, what are you doing your doctorate on?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not actually. I'm just getting a little deeper into my research here." And people, I started meeting people, or even just in the library there. I met the grandson of Harold Thomas Faulkner Smith, who had a major art show or sort of art school in Vancouver, which I didn't even mention at all. It's one of the things that got cut out of hundreds of things that got cut. And he was just starting research into his grandfather. And I said, Cheryl, to the librarian, "Can you just print out his grandfather's biography?"
Like, what are some items right now that in your searches, it seems like there's lots of serendipity in what the items you find, but what are some items that you're aware of that they exist, that you're on the lookout for?
Well, I'm still looking for early catalogues for the BC Society of Fine Arts. Most of those are missing. I've only seen 2 or 3 or 4 from the first 20 years or so. So that's kind of like a gap in, what I wanted to complete was to just sort of, sort of fill in those gaps.
We have a couple questions coming in. Where can one buy copies of the reference work you published about BC artists? Other than the site, is there other sources for it?
No, it's all online right now.
Mm-hmm.
The 100% of the project is online.
So it continues to be available through the site.
I am willing to sell like a CD or a DVD to somebody who, or a USB key full of information to somebody who doesn't have, say, easy internet access or has a, slow access. And I'm willing. There's also a whole bunch of backup information. Like I've got like 1,200 vital statistics documents. I've got, biographical information on about 200 artists and images and, PDFs and scans and stuff. I mean, there's a huge amount of backup information that's not really online.
Yeah.
It's, what's online is kind of like a finding aid to the information that I found, because there's no way I could list everything and copy everything and show everything out of, like, say, 4,000 publications.
Do you know of any other projects that are similar to what you're doing with regards to BC artists in this kind of regard?
BC artists, no. Somebody is doing something quite similar in Quebec for Quebec artists. And the National Gallery sort of has a huge list of, their Canadian artists website. They list like 50,000 Canadian artists, but it's a finding aid to locations that have information on the artists, other than they sort of give the birth dates and whatever. And it's not really a sort of a research location. It's a finding aid. Okay. So I have my project is more of a finding aid, plus I give a bunch of the early information, because most people aren't going to be able to find it. It's like, it's unique, or there's only one of, like, a lot of the stuff, like I've only ever seen one copy of a lot of the stuff that I showed today. It's like, it's out there maybe, but it's rare.
One of the questions here is, as an Easterner, I'm not so familiar with Savory Island. How did the Shermans get there? And how long did they stay? Was it a summer place only, or did other BC artists spend time there?
Good question. Maud's father, R.S. Sherman, first went to the island in 1890. He was surveying land in Powell River for the lake that they put the dam in to enable the pulp mill to start in Powell River. He saw the island across and he rode over to it, and he liked it. And then he got into developing it. Then the family, for many years, they would go up by Union steamships. You just hop on the steamship down in the harbor here, and it would have a couple of stops going up the coast, and then they just drop you off on the wharf at Savory after, a couple of fabulous meals and maybe a night on the ship. And Maud started going there in 1908, and she didn't go there later in her life, but till 1940 or 45, she was going up there. And a lot of artists went there, like I briefly mentioned the Savory pudding. There was like 50 artists in those exhibitions, or sorry, expeditions. And also numerous other artists like Nan Lawson Chaney, Helen Griffin, Frankie Kiefer, just, there's one after the other who, it's a very scenic place. I've done quite a bit of artwork of the island myself. I just showed a couple pieces only.
A question here more about sort of the BC artists, the online initiative. Have you noticed an uptick of feedback and responses from the web? Did the pandemic have an impact on your research? Was it good or bad in terms of the work that you were able to dedicate for it?
Oh, well, hard to tell. I uploaded the website to the internet, or the project to the internet, in December 2019. Which was about the same time we were about to go under. And I don't think I was tracking statistics back then. I am now. So I can't say there was a difference because it hadn't been up on the web prior to that. Mm. But there is a sort of an increase of people who seem to know about it, and the hits sort of kind of steadily kind of climb, and I get more oddball things like people mailing me 115-year-old postcards from Amsterdam. I was like, yes, thank you. Mm-hmm. Now I just have to find someone who translates Dutch.
Or there's someone on the call that can get you in touch with someone who speaks Dutch. I have another question here. Since people move about Canada and the world, what is the minimum connection to be considered a BC artist? How broad is the net that you're casting?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, and I've wrestled with it quite a bit. I mean, some artists, there's no question about it. Emily Carr, E.J. Hughes, Jack Shadbolt, they've traveled around the world, but they come back here. They were born here. They're BC artists. They paint BC. They kind of are BC. Others like Walter Phillips, he kept moving west from England to Winnipeg, to Calgary, to Vancouver Island. Is like, you're going any further? Is that it? But he became, it's someone like him, he becomes a BC artist because BC becomes his artwork. So that's one category. An arrival who, knows nothing about BC, like W.P. Weston came here, and he was a trained professional artist, and he apparently just couldn't paint because he just couldn't grasp the landscape. So eventually he came around, and now he's known for these massive BC landscapes, and yeah, he got it. So he's a BC artist. It's, and some people come and they go, and they come and they go, and it's, if they've done artwork of BC that's been exhibited in BC, that would be kind of one of the lower end delimiters, if you will.
We have a question in here, looking at your collection, the various specimens you have here, where do you see your archive eventually being kept?
Yeah, it's been going in all directions for quite some time. I ended up with way too many publications and books and things and artworks and stuff. So I've donated quite a bit, and there's a list on my website, more or less, a short form. For the National Gallery of Canada, I've given them about 900 publications. SFU special collections, I gave them most of my letterpress collection. Burnaby Art Gallery got a bunch of stuff related to mostly Jack Wise. Let me see. University of Victoria got a large collection of my ephemera from, say, 1995 to 2005. I was kind of collecting around the turn of the millennium material, just sort of like what happened at the turn of, was 2000, what happened, so you got most of that. Emily Carr got a large donation of art school material last year. So I'm kind of going in all directions, kind of piecing it. It's hard to find a donor, or sorry, a recipient who wants everything. Yeah. Right? Because there's different subject matter. Okay, here's an artist, he's a mountaineer, he's a photographer, he's an artist, he's a whatever. And someone will want only the stuff that's like the mountaineer stuff, but never mind all the other stuff, but it's all one person. Mm-hmm. Right? And they go into, so it's finding a collection that wants everything is tricky.
Maybe finishing off with this question, there's you notice in breweries and other initiatives historical references of the area of Vancouver and the surrounding area. Have you been noticing any kind of appropriations of the graphic design of the collections that you were speaking about this evening? Do you see it being referenced in any kind of way in the current context?
Well, I'd say Emily Carr University. Gary, can you do a talk number 2? Thank you, Mona. Come over for a drink. I'll talk all night. Emily Carr University would be still referencing some of the earlier designs, like the Jock MacDonald designs from the early days in some of their current works. Probably more quasi-industrial, people like to sort of show workers with picks over their shoulders in a brew pub sort of thing, right? Mm. And I'm not going out very much anymore, actually, since the invasion of the germs. Yeah, I haven't quite reconstituted that sort of side of my social life. So,
well, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to put this together. I'm seeing references here to a second talk, which we should absolutely have conversations to see this into the future.
Next time you have to pay me.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much for taking.
My pleasure. I'm glad to see all the people joining us tonight. Thank you all for joining.